Hi, everybody. Today we're talking to Jacqueline from That Anxiety Community. So good to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so today we're just going to talk about what's it like to have OCD as someone who suffers from OCD. And yeah, maybe I can just start with some quick fire questions that you could answer.
Sure, yeah.
And we'll go from there. Describe the scariest intrusive thought you ever had in one sentence.
Oh, in one sentence? That's tough. I don't know. I know my scariest intrusive thoughts. I don't know. Just like hell, I guess.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
What's a compulsion you did and you didn't even realize it was a compulsion?
My mental compulsions. I thought that OCD was a lot of physical compulsions, but I did a lot of mental checking, rumination, and things like that. And I had no idea that that was part of OCD.
What's one harmless thing you did that was actually feeding your OCD?
Reassurance. It's definitely not harmless, but I struggled a lot with like health-themed OCD. And I would ask everybody in my life, like, I'd be like, are you sure I'm not going to die? Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? And I'd even go to the doctor several different times. And I didn't understand at the time that that was perpetuating my OCD.
Makes sense. I also had that, by the way. I went to the doctor so many times. What helped most for your OCD?
I'd say actually meeting people that had OCD, because I was first diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. And I didn't understand why I always felt so different. When my friends who had anxiety would talk about their intrusive thoughts, they were always less violent, less like taboo, I'd say. And so it helped a lot actually meeting people in the community.
And what's the hardest thing you had to learn to overcome your OCD?
The hardest thing, I think, looking more long-term than short-term. Like in the moment, I think this compulsion is going to make me feel better, but I really have to stop and say, is this going to make me feel better long-term? Because I can't really sit there and go, when am I going to get better? When am I going to feel better if I'm only short-term doing things like compulsions that give that temporary relief? Yeah, what OCD themes do you struggle with the most? Or
at the moment, or?
More in the past, I guess, yeah.
So yeah, for me, it started with harm OCD. So I had a date, like a Tinder date, and I went on that, and all of a sudden, I had a sudden onset OCD, which just comes all of a sudden. There's a switch in your mind that goes off.
Oh.
And for me, I was super scared about hurting her. So I had intrusive thoughts about strangling, killing even, and I wanted to get away, but it was 4:00 in the morning, so I couldn't. So I called all my friends, my families, trying to tell them I was going crazy, and then I needed to, that they needed to call the police on me because I would probably gonna hurt this.
When I would have those thoughts, I would try and hide them because I feel I don't want people to think I'm weird.
Yeah, trust me. I mean, I wanted to hide them as well, but I was with this girl. I couldn't go anywhere. There were no buses going, no trains. I wasn't with car or anything. The Netherlands, so.
Yeah,
that's why I was stuck. So I actually went to the living room and slept on the couch while sleeping. Wasn't really going on, but she was luckily studying as a psychologist, so she thought already hey, this is a bit weird, right? But I think you might be struggling with some stuff. Just lay down. I think it's anxiety. I said, no, it's not. I was trying to explain to her there wasn't.
You said sudden onset. I've never spoken with somebody that had that. Did you have any signs as a child that you were more anxious?
Yeah, so I've always been super anxious as a kid. If there were horror stories on the TV, I would imagine those horror stories for the next year, that would happen to me.
Too. Yeah.
So if it were funny stories about ghosts, I would actually take it serious and I think, my house was haunted, or I would get a crocodile underneath my bed, even though there's no crocodiles in the Netherlands, stuff like that, always crying. And also as a kid, I also had OCD a bit, thoughts about it, meaning that I had thoughts about my parents dying. When I would think my parents would die, I would think that and it would be the truth. So what I would do was reverse it. So in my mind, I had a switch that I invented myself as a kid, which was everything that I am now thinking of is the opposite. So if I would think somebody would die, yeah, it's super handy, right? Yeah. So that's what I did. And it worked because my parents didn't die. But then someday I forgot about it and I had the thoughts and just nothing happened. So then I learned, okay, probably this has no effect on me. So I outgrew my OCD. But I've always stayed an anxious kid and had generalized anxiety disorder on paper for a couple of times. And I also, to end the story, is that I was bullied quite extensively. And during that time, I had many, I would say anxiety attacks in that period and always classified as general anxiety disorder. But in hindsight, it was OCD. And especially health OCD and going crazy OCD, those kinds of things.
Yeah, no, me too. I remember when I was a kid, I didn't know that I had OCD until I was like 16 years old. But looking back, I remember I would walk to school, which is only about a minute walk. But I'd plug my ears and in my head, I would repeat, you're going to die, you're going to die, you're going to die the whole way, because then I would the opposite would happen and I wouldn't die.
So, exactly. It makes total sense.
Time. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I'm lucky that I outgrew it at such an early age, I guess, that, that I wasn't stuck with it so long. But yeah, I would say that harm OCD was one of the biggest ones. And then, of course, well, not of course, one of my best friends had a schizophrenic episode in the period that I actually caught him in that. And it was quite traumatic. And then I had the fear of going insane myself. That compared with OCD, that was my second team. The third was I had depersonalization, still struggle from that. And that added to the feel of what is this real or not. So it's that kind of OCD.
What does that feel like? I feel like everybody has their own descriptions of what derealization or just dissociation in general feels like. What did that feel like for you?
Yeah, so for me, it's always on. So for me, and it never, when OCD came, this also came into my life daily. So it's always a 6, I would say, and it can increase to a 9. And what does it feel like? It feels for me that I'm living in a dream that I'm conscious in. So like a dream that, they have a name for that in English, but I forgot about it. And yeah, it feels like there's like a big piece of glass in front of me, like a thick one that is foggy. And also my brain feels like that it's a bit like to the back. I cannot explain it better than that. And it feels that everything in life goes on super quickly, and I'm just a part of that, but not consciously a part of that, if that makes sense. What's it like for you?
Well, the first time I had it was when I first started having thoughts of, am I losing my mind? Am I losing my grip on reality? And I actually ended up going to the ER because in Canada, that's where I'm from, it takes a lot, the healthcare system, it's free healthcare, but it takes a long time to see a doctor. So they have on-call psychiatrists. And so I went to that. Well, it wasn't an appointment, but I went to the hospital and I was like, I don't feel right. I feel like I'm losing my grip on reality. I feel like all this. And the psychiatrist was basically like, people who are losing their mind aren't they're not aware that they're losing their grip on reality. And for me, it kind of just feels like you said, you're in a dream and there's just a sheet of maybe plexiglass in front of my face. Sometimes I feel almost a little bit dizzy, but not really, just my eyes just aren't working properly. And then I have an existential crisis and I feel like I'm watching myself in the corner of the room. I'm just so aware of the world and it would almost being high, but I don't do drugs. I'm just super, super aware. Yeah.
I guess you kind of do, right? I mean, it feels a bit like that. I would say I've been high a couple of times in my life. Not because I'm Dutch, but just, being a teenager. But it kind of feels a bit like that, I would say. But then again, it's different. It's different for anybody.
Reality.
Yeah. It's weird. It feels like it definitely feels like a protective system because it feels that you cannot really enjoy the fullness of your senses, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially when I'm with my fiance, it can sometimes be a bummer because you want to feel fully in that moment, but you're kind of restricted in that. And it's a defense mechanism, of course, that your brain puts up in order to deal with the trauma or the experience that you're having right now. But for some reason, with me, it stayed on. I'm not really bothered by it, so I don't get anxiety from it or I feel worse during the day. I just accept it as a part of my life now. I don't want it to go away. I don't have it. I don't need it to go away. So I'm at that point in my life, but I used to have it in a completely different.
Well, I feel just knowing what it is, because when I first experienced it, I just thought, okay, this must be what losing your grip with reality is like. But when I learned that it's actually that protective mechanism, then I stopped fighting it so much. And then it's just a thing in the background now.
Yeah. Something you have to just accept, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what has your experience been like? So when did you know it was OCD for you?
So it's kind of similar to you where it was a little bit sudden, but looking back on it, my whole life, I've experienced OCD. I just thought that everybody was that anxious, But when I was 16, I went on birth control and I had a bad reaction to it where all of a sudden I was just very emotional, depressed. I think I was allergic to it or something. But then my immune system was weakened and I got tonsillitis. And then I went on amoxicillin, which is just the antibiotic for the first time. And then I had anaphylaxis to that antibiotic. And so then to counteract that or to treat that, the hospital, they gave me epinephrine, they gave me a bunch of steroids, things like that. which all induce anxiety. And so it probably took like 3 weeks for the hives to fully go away because I was just head to toe with hives. And that's when my OCD kind of like really was like full force because I was by myself for the first time and I was looking in the mirror. And then all of a sudden I had my first panic attack where I felt like there was almost like cold air going into my throat. And then my throat just like suctioned shut. And like, I couldn't breathe. And someone who didn't know that I had, an OCD diagnosis, my first instinct was call an ambulance. You're dying. You're having rebound anaphylaxis is what I thought. So I called an ambulance and then they were like, no, you're not having allergic reaction. You're having like a panic attack. And I just thought that's no, because I had a best friend at the time that had anxiety her whole life. And I was always like, oh, I'm the one who doesn't have anxiety. You're the one who has anxiety. And it was just a shock to me. I was like, no, something's happening right now. This is a medical thing. And then they said, no, like you're having a panic attack. So that was my first experience. And then for about 5 years, every single day, it was just full-fledged. Like I stopped eating everything. I stopped eating all food because my body was just like very sensitive. So I'd get like a small amount of hives when I would eat. My face would flush red, but nothing severe. Just like I was so into and with scanning for this stuff that I had a panic attack anytime I would have a slight itch.
Mm. And so what types do you struggle with and OCD themes?
Yeah, so that was major. That one was health themed. And so it started with allergies and then it went to blood clots, aneurysms, that I had diabetes at one point. And so I went through all of these things. And then there was one point where I hadn't left the house in 3 months straight because I convinced myself that if I was bitten by a mosquito outside, that I would have anaphylaxis. And I'm somebody that besides that antibiotic, I don't have any allergies. And so at the same time, giving into all these compulsions, it's like the world was just like shrinking for me. And after that, I couldn't leave the couch because I was afraid that if I raised my blood pressure, that I would just have a stroke or an aneurysm. So then I couldn't leave the couch. And there were times where my parents would be like, if you don't eat food, if you don't get up, like we're going to have to take you to the hospital. Like I was doing more harm to my body in the behavior by not eating, not sleeping, things like that, than I was just trying to protect myself from the world. But once I started going to therapy, which was a few months later, and I started seeing how the cycle of OCD worked, that's when I started questioning if I was losing my mind, which I didn't know at the time was another OCD theme, because I was starting to see, oh, you get the intrusive thought, then you get, I was starting to see the cycles. And then once I saw the cycle, I was like, my brain's broken. I don't trust my brain at all, because I felt like for months I was living in this reality of I'm sick, I'm going to die tomorrow, or I'm going to get in a car accident. And it felt so real that I was like, I must be losing my mind if I'm experiencing a different reality than everybody else. So that's when I started fearing losing my mind. So the themes would be health. Then it went into, I'd say, schizophrenia, OCD. And then that one was really, really tough because I just have so much knowledge of like mental health disorders and stuff that ignorance is a bliss with OCD. And when you have so much knowledge, it's like your OCD has so much more to work with. And then those were my main ones. I dabble in like all of them, but those were my main ones.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I had kind of a similar story with the health, at least. Also, trying to go to the doctors all the time, being afraid you have a heart attack if you, work out too much, or having some kind of a, brain aneurysm again, or all that stuff. Even when I was older, when I was 21, I would go to my parents' place and just ask them to bring me to the doctor just to check out if I wasn't for real, And in hindsight, but at the moment you're actually ashamed, right? You know that probably there's nothing going on, but you cannot help yourself to check.
Yeah.
You just have to do it.
There's a 1% chance. It's such a serious outcome that it feels so important, right?
Yeah. And it's not even 1%. Like, I remember I know there's nothing going on. I did all the checks. I mean, I had all the checks, like ticks and stuff, to check if I wasn't having some kind of a weird thing going on. But it was never enough. And yeah, I would say that's probably the reason why most people struggle with OCD.
What
right?
physical symptoms did you experience? Did you have that at all?
Yeah, so I had a lot of tics when I was, I think, between 15 and 19. I had a lot of physical tics, which also were anxiety reducing for me. So, I mean, I can even do them still because I still have them in my system, but it was all the time like checking my fingers to see if they were still moving. It was doing my face thing like this, for example, to see if it worked. I was also doing the eye thing where I would just, I don't know, it felt good. I think with 19, I learned about, that relaxing the body is quite important. So I tried to do that. And the first months were horrendous. I didn't even have an OCD diagnosis back then, but I just wanted to be normal, right? Because I sat in the train and people would look at me weird. I would look on the street. People would think I'm kind of a crazy person with all those tics, right? Yeah. And I would try to force myself to, even though when I felt super anxious, to not do those tics. So for me, it was kind of brute forcing my way through it without the diagnosis. But it worked. But I was 26, so I had multiple therapy sessions before. So in the Netherlands, you get 12, and then you're back into the world again. And I had 2 of those. Both were for generalized anxiety disorder. And when I was 26, with the sudden onset OCD, of course, before that it was also OCD, but this was severe sudden onset OCD. I had my first diagnosis with OCD. They told me, I called the doctor at first, and he told me I had probably there's something wrong where, we get you somebody to talk to, and I had to wait 6 weeks. And after those 6 weeks, you have an intake where they say, hey, these are your symptoms. We suspect it's OCD. You can come back in 6 to 7 months. So then you get the diagnosis, and then you're left with the diagnosis. Yeah. And then I started learning. Then I started to look up what OCD was, of course, and look into it. But
how did that feel for you to see? Like, what did you find when you looked up OCD?
Well, I mean, like every person with OCD that's watching, probably you went through the Google route or the Reddit route or the YouTube route. I would say YouTube is the safest all of those.
Yeah, Reddit.
But when I ended up in Reddit, it was only reassurance seeking. So the OCD community, OCD community, like it's a bliss that it's there because it gives people a space where they can vent. Oh my God, it was just a minefield of people seeking reassurance and people going on there,
or just confirming your worst fears.
Yes,
they're like,
exactly.
They're telling you their 1% story, and then I'm terrified.
Yeah. Exactly. That happened for me. And Googling, I didn't, it was just the worst. But I came across Mark Freeman in that period. I don't know if you know that YouTuber, but I would definitely recommend him. But he had lives where he talked about OCD, and I would just spam his comment section with all the questions. And he would actually do some ERP on his comment section. So he gave me the first insights on what OCD was and how to deal with it. Because that's the shitty part. At least in the Netherlands, you have to wait a long time. You don't really have anything for the period. They give you they give you like a PDF and like a helpline. If you suicide helpline, if it really doesn't work, like what the fuck, also triggering. But you just have to deal with it yourself. How does the system look like in Canada? I'm curious. So you get a diagnosis and then
similar to like Europe. I know that like in the States, like in America, they really struggle because they don't have free healthcare. And obviously in Canada, we don't have free healthcare for mental health completely. Like we do, but it's almost like you have to wait like a year or 2 years to get into something. You don't get to choose your therapist with it. You might be put in a support group. So I did the private route just because I'm privileged enough that my parents couldn't afford it. And I think that was everything. That made the biggest difference. I think people get better depending on their support system, on how much they can put in, and also the resources that are available. And so that's got to be tough in America, I think. But I think that Canada is pretty similar to Amsterdam. I think it's got to be. Yeah. Long wait times, but like you can get help that's free. But then you're kind of on your own too, because they give you that PDF. They're like, this is what you got. Here's a referral to a support group that in 6 months you might get into. And I don't know. Yeah. So I was kind of this year. So then I just
makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, there wasn't really any private options, at least only coaching. So OCD coaching, but not really any private practices. And I guess it's because our system works really, really well, I suspect. But again,
I think that's good.
Maybe they're now, but back when I first had it, I had it when I was 26. That was my first OCD episode, and now I'm 34. So it's a while back. Yeah. What were one of the darkest moments you faced with OCD?
It was weird. And here's a trigger warning for anybody that deals with like harm, self-harm, suicidal thoughts. I was so afraid of dying with OCD, but at the same time, it was controlling my life so much. I didn't have any friends anymore. I was very suicidal. And it was so weird. It was like a catch-22 because I was so afraid of dying, but I just wanted a way out. So I didn't really want to die, but I had a lot of tendencies with that. And there were often times where I would be crying in the bathroom. I'd stolen my mom's thyroid pills, and which even if I took, that probably wouldn't have been enough, which would have been really, really bad. But she would be sitting on the outside of the door and just talking me down. And I would just say, I don't want to be here anymore. It's not going to get better. I genuinely believed it could not ever get better because that 5-year span, it wasn't like I had progress. It was just straight across a 10 out of 10 every single day. And I think that was during the time where I was having schizophrenia OCD. And so I only had my parents and I was on the couch and I wasn't eating and I wasn't sleeping either because I was also afraid of carbon monoxide poisoning. And so I assumed that when I was tired and falling asleep that I was actually just, passing away. So I was afraid every single night that I wouldn't wake up. So then I wasn't eating. So I wasn't doing any of the essential things. So my mental health was just further declining. And I remember one specific day, my dad bought me a bike because this was during the time where they didn't really understand what OCD was either. And they were just trying to do everything they could. So he bought me $800 bike. He was like, we're going to start biking. This is going to fix everything. And it was really sweet of him. I understand the effort that was. But we were in the car and I was just asking them questions. I was like, do you guys ever hear voices? Do you guys ever and then we go in a store and I'd be like, do you guys see that person too? And the answer was always yes, because I have OCD. I don't have schizophrenia. But I was just constantly asking for reassurance that I didn't have this. And there was one time that I went to this doctor. She wasn't a medical doctor. She was a homeopathic doctor, but I'd been to her since I was a baby. And it was a big mistake because she ended up telling me I don't even have anxiety, which is the bare minimum diagnosis that I would get. But I was so afraid of having schizophrenia. And I went to her appointment and she was like, no, I have clients that have schizophrenia and they come into my office and they think that they're the Queen of England. And then I was like, oh, okay. And then I had that kind of minute of, oh, I feel better. And then the next minute I was like, I didn't ask her about this. I didn't ask her about this. And then I started ruminating. So then I went home and my brain had these intrusive thoughts where it was, do you believe that you're the Queen of England? And then in my head, I would hear, you're the Queen of England, you're the Queen of England, you're the Queen of England. And then my brain would go, do you believe that? Do you believe that thought? Because if you believe that, that means that you are schizophrenic. And so I had a lot of that. And then I couldn't fall asleep because I was without the TV because I was afraid of hearing my own voice because I've convinced myself that my own voice was hearing voices. And then I was terrified of hallucinating too. So I would just stare at the TV because I didn't trust that if I looked away from the TV or didn't have it on, that I wouldn't start hallucinating and seeing something, which never happened. But then there was the one day where there was probably 8 times in the same day that I was going to try and take my own life. And then I remember having a panic attack so bad that I was just laying in the middle of the hallway and my mom was sitting beside me and my body was actually paralyzed. I couldn't move my body. And that's something I'd never experienced before. I was still in the stage where I didn't understand how mental health could cause so many physical symptoms, like psychosomatic symptoms, because obviously I could get up. But in the moment, it felt like my limbs couldn't move. And I was there for probably about an hour just laying in the middle of the floor. And then my brother, who I wasn't super close with at the time, my mom called him at work because she just didn't know what to do either. And so he was in a truck full of guys at work talking to me. And I was just like, I can't get up. I don't want to be here anymore. I think I'm losing my mind. I don't have any grip on reality at all. And it's just so crazy that OCD is just making all this up. It's so crazy because then my dad would be like, well, from an outside perspective, I understand that it's OCD because he's very logical. And he'd be like, you always get an intrusive thought. Then you get a feeling from it. Then you do the compulsion. Then you get the temporary relief. And then you keep going and spiraling. And during that moment, my brother was just very sweet and he was talking to me. But everybody's first instinct was give reassurance. And so every time I asked for reassurance that something wasn't happening, I needed more and more and more and more and more. So I think the lowest point of my OCD ever was just laying on the floor and not being able to move my limbs. That was a crazy feeling.
I mean, for all the, it sounds a lot like my story, actually, the same experience is just different.
Maybe it's because we're both dead.
Maybe we have the same gene. that makes sure that we get this kind of intensity. No, I mean I had those, right. So when I would sit in the car, look in the back mirror, and like, am I thinking that this guy's following me? Like, because crazy people would think they were following me, right? So I would have intrusive thoughts about that, but also look into reflections of the bus to not look at them, because I was afraid I would look at myself and see like a different image, or like stuff like that, just to check that you're not going crazy, right? And also the inner voice, I would actually be afraid. Still, sometimes I have those, and then I would be afraid of my own inner voice, because then, okay, but isn't this what people that hear voices experience? Is this the first step, right? Is this going to be another voice, or then you hear like your mother's voice or your father's voice?
The more you know about schizophrenia, and the more your OCD uses it as like material.
Exactly. And but like I said, my friend back then had it, and he would explain all those experiences that he had, and I would just internalize that and just project it on myself, right? So he's doing this, am I doing that? So it's, and also what you said with the body, right? I had a lot of sleep paralysis. I don't know if you experienced that in your time. Yeah. So because I wasn't sleeping because of my OCD, so I would have that on top of that, and that would only, go into my health anxiety, because I couldn't move, right? I thought I was paralyzed, like, and then you just laying down, actually experiencing what it's like to be paralyzed, like, for a second. And then, of course, it only feeds into the OCD. So, like you said, I think therapy and understanding OCD is one of the first things. And like you said, right, your family. My dad kind of did something the same. So my parents have a big house, like in the countryside. So I went there, and he always said, okay, if we work, then you can get over stuff, right? If you struggle with stuff, go outside in nature and get over it. So he would actually...
That is my dad.
Yeah, he would actually...
Very, like, logical people.
Exactly. So he would just pull me outside and say, okay, now we're going to cut the branches of the trees. And you're going to do that. And I'm really thankful for him, because it did help me a bit with exposure, like unwillingly. It got me back on my feet. But the way, maybe our parents' generations deal with stuff is totally different than what is needed for OCD, right? And one of the reasons why my dad did this is because he experienced mental health in his own family, and he was just afraid that I would be ending up like, for example, his uncle or his brother, so my uncle, that was also struggling with mental health, right? So I think our parents try to do the best they can, at least I think, hearing our stories, our parents.
Yeah, I just find that it's like natural instinct to give that reassurance.
Exactly.
The ones that you want to make them feel better. And so when you learn that it's making it worse, it's like, what do I do now?
And did you take your parents to therapy to help them understand that giving reassurance is actually feeding?
No. So what happened is my parents didn't really understand mental health in the beginning, but I didn't understand it either. So we all were kind of figuring it out together. My dad was, I would say my mom is the worst with providing reassurance, because she's like the most empathetic, loving person ever, that she just wants to be like, you're okay, which is what I want to hear in the moment. But the logical side of me is like, nope, that's going to make it worse. But my dad, he didn't even understand like what an OCD diagnosis was. I'm still trying to convince him that I think it comes from his side of the family, because we like think there similarly. But I would ask him, I was banned from Google. My therapist banned me from Google. So I'd try and ask my dad, I'd be like, Dad, can you just Google this? Can you just Google this? Can you filter through the scary stuff and just give me like the good stuff? Because I convinced myself that I was going blind. And so he was like, no, I'm not going to do that. And then he took out a bunch of papers, and he started, without even understanding what OCD was, he drew out all the patterns. He made me do like a Venn diagram. He made me do a cycle. He was like, this is how your OCD is working. So it's like he's like a psychologist without even knowing the labels. He was like, how do you not see that like this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens? And so my therapist wasn't an OCD specialist. We were doing talk therapy, which sometimes like it helps all the other areas of my life, but it did not help my OCD because it would just perpetuate it. But when my dad showed me those patterns, I had a light bulb moment. I was like, you're right. Oh my goodness. But then I got obsessive about needing reassurance, seeing those patterns. I'd be like, can you draw it again? Can you show me? Can you like show me? Yeah. So he's like really, both my parents are really, really good at understanding how it is now, but it took a long time. It's a big process. Sometimes I feel like you can learn OCD in a book, but unless it's one of those where unless you have somebody in front of you that has OCD, it's really, really hard to understand. It is. And with the different themes out there and the different ways of how people experience it, it's very hard, of course. And sometimes it's even hard to recognize, right? It's a condition where it's sometimes really hard to find help, right? I think we were both lucky to have a support system that could support us in that way, but there's people out there that spend
tens of years just thinking that they're the most awful person on the planet and not getting any help, right? So hopefully.
My dad is similar to your dad in the sense where my dad would be like, well, I guess in the Netherlands you call them like Oma and Opa, right? He'd be like, my Oma. He'd be like,
he can actually speak Dutch.
She would clean the house. He goes, she would do stuff. She would clean the house and get chores done. And so I'd be like laying in bed, not being able to get up. And he'd be like, have you cleaned today? Like he was just doing what he like knew it worked. But in a sense, it does work. As stubborn as it felt in the moment, because I'd be like, that's not going to do anything. Exercise isn't going to help me. It took a while to understand that structure, routine, and having the self-discipline to take care of your mental health is what made the difference. Because understanding that maybe the gym won't make me feel better this time, but having the structure of going twice a week and getting out of the house is what makes that difference.
Yeah, same. I think we should treat mental health more like physical health, right? It's a process, and you have to take care of your mental health as well. And I never really understood mental health at all before. I was forced to assess it. But before that, I never really had any explanations about how to keep proper mental health, right? And to take care of yourself. All that stuff I had to learn. And I think it's also weird that we don't, not getting taught this in school, right? Because they always say, physical health is important, but mental health could also be something we could talk about in schools. But
not stuff, but just coping skills. Like it's crazy. We're not taught that in elementary school. How to deal with our anger, how to self-regulate. It's just a whole other topic.
Yeah. We could talk about this for hours. And what helped the most for you when you were stuck in therapy or stuck waiting on therapy, or what are some things you can...
At the end of the day, the exposures helps. Not throwing myself in the deep end with them, but setting little goals and then having that self-discipline to actually follow through with it. So when I was afraid to exercise, I would do, even if it's 2 minutes of like jumping jacks that you're going to do every day, like set that small goal and have the consistency, because the consistency with the exposures is the most important. And so then just doing that, then eventually you're going to be like, this isn't scary. And then you got to exposure by exposure with the response prevention, then you're going to open your world back up. Like you can think of it as every compulsion you're doing, you're shrinking your world because you're more fearful of the world. And that's just confirming that your fears are true and that your compulsion's helping. And then every exposure with the response prevention is opening it back up. So I'd say just at the end of the day, the exposures, because when I was doing talk therapy, like I could talk about it until I was blue in the face, but like I'm almost like a very logical person that's like illogical with my OCD. So it's like, I need to see it in front of my eyes. So unless I'm actually going to do that, then I didn't find much help with just talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I would also say that I'm a logical person, but with OCD, I think it's not really about knowing that something doesn't make sense, because we probably know. If somebody put a gun against your head and said, okay, is this completely true? You probably say no. Like, what are you talking about? But
and
anything that's not
different from schizophrenia.
That's giving reassurance to the people watching. No kidding, but that's how it works with OCD. In essence, your brain has to catch up, right? Your emotions have to catch up. Your subconscious has to catch up with the fact that doing these exposures will actually help you to be more habituated towards the anxiety and the fact that in fact those thoughts on an emotional level don't really need any attention in that sense. And what's your OCD like now? Is it completely healed for you? Have you overcome your OCD, or is it an active recovery for you?
Like the way that my brain thinks is always going to be there, but it's almost like you just stop it in that cycle of doing the compulsion. Like you have the thought, but the thoughts don't mean anything to me. Like I remember my therapist saying one day that the day that I realized that my thoughts are just regular thoughts is going to be a light bulb moment. And it's true, because now I can watch a TV show and my brain can go, you're a murderer too, because do you like that on the show? And now I can just be like, it's just a thought, because I think I know so much how OCD works. It's like, oh, whatever.
Yeah, same for me. I would say that's what people ask me in the DMs all day, like how to get rid of my intrusive thoughts or my thoughts, or I don't want to think anymore. And it's not like that's what recovery is like. You still have those intrusive thoughts, but the way you deal with them is completely different. And that's the way you deal with them also happens to be the way we react to them. So in that case,
medication away from like having to be better all the time and just saying like, it's okay. Like you don't have to fight having low moments or being more anxious one day. Like it's okay. And it doesn't have to mean that you're going back to the way things were. Right.
Yeah. Because that's probably something I feared a lot with, is that every time I had a relapse, I would think, I'm back at square one. It's going to be,
No,
the relapses are real.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I did want to ask you before, is there like any like somatic symptoms that you would get? Like not somatic per se, but for me, my nervous system was so stressed out that when I convinced myself I was going blind and being the logical person that I was, it was because I was having visual symptoms. My nervous system was so stressed out, I'd see flashing lights, I'd have tunnel vision, and there were biological explanations for it, but I could not accept that it was from my OCD. I'd be like, no, it's anything but that. So did you have anything like that?
I cannot give any reassurance to you right now. Kidding. No, so for me, how can I explain this without triggering and also giving reassurance? I would say yes. I did have many of those. And especially with the thoughts, for example, think somatic stuff kind of is the same way how we need to deal with OCD, right? I would have many times where I would think I would faint, or where I would thought, okay, my fingers don't work anymore, or my hands don't work anymore, or my legs giving out, or whatever. But then again, it's also about, noticing that and just trying to move on with the day to not respond to that. And if in the smallest case this would ever be, still happening in real time, or I would actually lose my mind or whatever, then that's just the way it is, right?
Yeah, so not falling into those cognitive distortions.
Yeah, and I think that's what OCD can do, right? It can sneak in so many different ways. So for me, always when I think, can this be OCD or not, then I will always take the side of, yes, this probably is also OCD. Yeah. And I'm not perfect anyway, because I still, like you said, the brain is still, built in a way that's supporting OCD or intrusive thoughts and where we think. So sometimes I will have a little bit of a, relapse, but the way I recover from those will always be quicker if I put in the work, right? So relapse can now be, a quick second even can be a relapse, but I can be back at normal levels in a minute now, for example. And I think that's all by doing the work, right? Just like you've experienced with exposure response prevention. It's just going out in the war and then just, sticking your head up and trying not to get shot, and then realizing that there was never a war, and actually, you're just living like any other person. That's something your brain has to learn, and you cannot think your way through it. You cannot sit at home and think exposures, right? You have to do the work every day, and even when you think you're done, you still have to be mindful of incorporating this into your life to not fall back into the same addiction almost that you would have.
Yeah, that's kind of like that self-discipline I talk about. Like, you got to care about yourself enough to do what the right thing to do is never really the easy thing to do, right?
Yes. And also being mindful that, hey, even that structure and that doing good for you can become a compulsion, right? So then all of a sudden, you always have to be mindful of. Exactly. So, okay, I didn't go 2 days a week. So fuck, now maybe I will have OCD back again, and then sit with that uncomfortable feeling, right? That's, I guess, the whole lesson of OCD. And it's not fair that we have to deal with this, but the lessons, if you go through it, can be very, very valuable that you will keep for the rest of your life. But the way to learn those lessons is just very painful, hard, and you wouldn't wish it upon your worst enemy, probably.
Yeah. But at the same time, you're not living life if you don't have those low moments too, right? I saw that Grey's Anatomy. Richard, you've seen that show, but Richard Pepper was like, you're living life, like, you've lived life if you've had like high points, but also like you experience what like a low point is. That's like life. I know that was cheesy, but.
Yeah, it is. But usually those cheesy moments are like, you see them on the street, like live, laugh, love, and homeless with all that stuff. But the older you get and the more you learn, the more you see that those, stupid lines actually make sense. And that's maybe the best metaphor you can give, right? So logically speaking, probably it's right, but feeling it is a whole different level for the human experience. So sometimes you have to go through the hardship to feel what recovery actually is, instead of listening to people on YouTube like us, trying to find what it means to really find relief. So I think probably we'll end it there. So thanks so much for joining. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Do you want to share your socials so people can follow you?
Yes. So on Instagram, it's just that anxiety community. And on every other platform, actually, on YouTube, TikTok, that anxiety community.
Thanks so much. So give her a follow and speak again in a while. Bye-bye.